Some people spend a lifetime wondering why someone they love never came home. Wren Callahan was one of them. For 6 long months, she woke up every morning with the same question sitting on her chest. Where did he go? Why didn't he say goodbye? What could have been so important that he left without a single word? She was only 20 years old, but grief had already taught her more than most people learn in a lifetime. Her grandfather, Silas Callahan, had raised her since she was 7. He was the only family she had left. And then, one cold October morning, he simply vanished. His pickup truck was found at the edge of a forest road in Montana. The engine was cold. His wallet still sat on the passenger seat. His keys were still in the ignition. There was no blood, no struggle, no note. Only his old shepherd mixed dog Koda, waiting beside the driver's door for 3 full days. Refusing to eat, refusing to leave, refusing to believe. The search parties came. Then they left. The newspapers wrote about it for a week. Then they stopped. Everyone in the small town of Blackwood Ridge, Montana, said the same thing. Poor old Silas. Must have wandered off. Must have gotten confused. But Wren knew better. Her grandfather was 68 years old, and sharper than most men half his age. He didn't wander. He didn't get lost. He didn't leave things behind. Something had happened to him, something no one wanted to talk about. And now, 6 months later, Wren was living out of that same old pickup truck, parked in the corner of a Walmart lot outside Denver, washing her hair in gas station bathrooms, eating cold soup from cans, trying to hold on to whatever pieces of her old life were still left. Every morning, before the sun came up, she placed 2 bowls on the small folding table inside the truck bed. One was hers. The other belonged to a man everyone believed would never come home. Koda, now 10 years old and moving slower these days, always walked to the second bowl first. He would sniff it once. Then he would sit down, and he would stare out through the windshield toward the empty road. Only when Wren whispered, "Maybe tomorrow, boy," would he finally lower his head and eat. People say dogs don't understand grief. Koda proved them wrong every single day. Wren had lost so much already. Her parents died in a house fire when she was 7. She remembered the sound of the smoke alarm more than she remembered their faces. After that, Silas took her in. He wasn't a perfect man. He had been a hard man once, a United States Marshal for over 30 years. He had seen things most people couldn't imagine. When his son died in that fire, Silas fell apart. He drank himself half to death. He lost his job. He lost his friends. He almost lost himself completely. But one evening, he looked at the little girl sleeping on his couch, and something inside him woke up. He poured every bottle of whiskey he owned down the kitchen sink. He never touched another drink again. Not one. He worked whatever jobs he could find, fixing fences, training dogs, teaching young men how to shoot straight at the county range. Whenever Wren apologized for being a burden, he would look at her with those calm gray eyes and say the same thing. Life doesn't decide who we become, sweetheart. We do. She never forgot those words. Not once. Koda came into their lives when Wren was 13. A retired canine Malinois from a drug task force. His handler had been killed in the line of duty. Nobody wanted the dog. He was too old, too traumatized, too difficult. Silas brought him home anyway. That first night, Koda refused to enter the house. So Silas sat outside with him on the porch until sunrise, wrapped in a blanket, talking softly, not moving. From that day forward, Koda never left his side. The 3 of them didn't have much, but they had enough. Enough laughter, enough homemade dinners, Enough quiet evenings on the porch, watching the mountains disappear into the dusk. Looking back now, Wren understood something she couldn't understand then. Those ordinary days had been the richest days of her life. And now, they were gone. She had lost her apartment 3 months ago. She had sold nearly everything she owned. Her guitar, her books, her mother's necklace. All of it piece by piece just to keep gas in the truck and food in the bowls. She had nowhere to go. No plan. No hope, until the lawyer called. His name was Mr. Whitfield, an older man with a soft voice and a Denver office lined with dusty law books. He asked Wren to come in as soon as possible. He said her grandfather had left something for her. She almost didn't go. She was afraid it would be a bill, or bad news, or nothing at all. But something in her chest told her to drive. When she sat down across from Mr. Whitfield's desk, he slid an envelope toward her, yellowed at the edges, sealed with old wax. "Your grandfather left this in my care 10 years ago," he said quietly, with very specific instructions. Wren stared at the envelope. 10 years ago. That would have made her 10 years old. 10 years ago, she whispered. Mr. Whitfield nodded slowly. He told me it was only to be opened if he could not deliver it himself. Her hands were shaking as she broke the seal. Inside was a deed, a land title, and a single folded note in her grandfather's steady, careful handwriting. The deed was for a property called Hollowstone Ranch, 57 acres of land in Blackwood Ridge, Montana. A place Wren had never once heard of. A place her grandfather had never mentioned. Not in all the years she had lived with him. She unfolded the note. There were only 3 lines. "When you are ready, come home. The land will remember you, even if you don't remember it. Trust Koda. He knows the way." She read it 3 times. Then she looked up at Mr. Whitfield. "He bought this 10 years ago and never told me." The lawyer folded his hands on the desk. "Miss Callahan, your grandfather was a private man, but I can tell you this. He did not buy that land for himself. He bought it for you." Wren left that office in a daze. She sat in the parking lot for almost an hour. Koda watched her the whole time. He didn't whine. He didn't move. He just waited. The way he always did. She looked at the address on the deed. Then she looked at the tank of gas she had left. "Well, boy," she whispered, "I guess we're going home." She didn't know it yet, but she was driving straight toward the secret her grandfather had died trying to protect. And in less than 1 day, 3 quiet knocks in the middle of the night would change her life forever. The drive to Blackwood Ridge took nearly 7 hours. Wren watched the highway turn into 2-lane roads, then into gravel, then into something that barely qualified as a road at all. The mountains grew taller around her. The trees grew thicker. The world grew quieter. By the time she reached the town, the afternoon sun was already dipping behind the pine ridges. Blackwood Ridge was small, smaller than she expected. A single main street, a hardware store, a diner with a hand-painted sign, a church at the far end with a white steeple. The kind of town where everyone knows your name before you tell them. The kind of town where nothing bad is supposed to happen. She didn't stop. She kept driving, following the old paper map Mr. Whitfield had folded into the envelope. The road climbed higher. The trees pressed closer. And then, just when she thought she might have taken a wrong turn, the trees opened up, and she saw it. Hollowstone Ranch, 57 acres of quiet meadow. A weathered wooden farmhouse painted the palest silver gray. A sagging front porch. A crooked barn. And behind all of it, rising up like a wall against the sky, an enormous cliff face of pale granite. 80 feet tall, streaked with lichen and centuries of rain. It stood over the ranch like a sleeping giant. Wren stopped the truck. She just stared for a moment. She had never seen anything like it. Koda jumped down from the passenger seat before she had even turned off the engine. He paused at the bottom of the porch steps. He sniffed the air. Then, without hesitation, he climbed the steps and sat down beside the front door. Waiting, Wren watched him, her hands still on the steering wheel. "You remember this place, don't you?" she whispered. Koda looked back at her. He didn't answer. Some questions don't need words. She stepped out of the truck. The mountain air hit her like cold water, sharp, clean, smelling of pine and stone. The front door opened with surprising ease, as if someone had oiled the hinges recently. Inside, the farmhouse smelled of old cedar and cold ashes. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains yellowed with time. Furniture stood exactly where someone had left it years ago. A rocking chair by the fireplace, a small kitchen table, a worn bookshelf. Nothing fancy, nothing valuable. But every room carried the strange, quiet feeling that someone had planned to come back. Wren walked slowly through the house. She ran her hand along the fireplace mantel. Faded outlines showed where photographs had once stood. In the kitchen, she found an old enamel coffee mug hanging from a hook. The paint had chipped away, but she could still read the words. "Home is where love waits." She didn't know why, but her throat tightened, and her eyes filled with tears she didn't understand. She spent the afternoon quietly unpacking. She didn't have much. 2 suitcases, a family photo album, her grandfather's old pocket knife, a quilt her grandmother had sewn before Wren was even born. Funny how quickly a whole lifetime could fit into so few boxes. Outside, Koda wandered the property. But he didn't wander like a curious dog. He walked with purpose. Along the fence line, around the old barn, past the huge oak tree near the edge of the meadow. He paused near the base of the cliff and stared up at it for a long moment. Then he came back to the porch. He sat down beside Wren, and he waited. As evening settled over the valley, the temperature dropped fast. Wren gathered fallen branches and lit a small fire in the stone fireplace. The warm light slowly filled the living room. For the first time in 6 months, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel again. Peace, not happiness. Not yet. But peace. She heated a can of soup on the old stove. Koda stretched out beside the fire. The farmhouse creaked now and then, the way old houses do. Silas used to say every house had its own language. You just had to live there long enough to understand what it was trying to tell you. She wished she could ask him what this house was saying. After dinner, she stepped out onto the porch. The countryside was unlike anything she had ever experienced. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors, only the sound of crickets and the whisper of wind through the tall grass. Above her, thousands of stars filled the sky. She couldn't remember the last time she had seen so many. Koda sat beside her. His ears twitched once. Then again. Wren followed his gaze. Nothing. Just an old dirt road disappearing into the darkness. "You miss him too, don't you?" she whispered. Koda rested his head against her knee. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Sometimes silence is the closest thing we have to prayer. By 10 o'clock, exhaustion finally caught up with her. She locked the front door, checked the windows, spread the old quilt across the bed upstairs. But Koda refused to enter the bedroom. Instead, he lay down in the hallway, right outside her door, exactly the way he had done every night since Silas disappeared. Wren reached down and scratched behind his ears. "You don't have to guard me anymore, buddy." He simply closed his eyes. Some promises even dogs refused to break. Sleep came quickly, but it did not last. She woke suddenly, not from a nightmare, from a sound. Knock. Her eyes opened in the dark. The room was still. Only pale moonlight spilled through the curtains. She held her breath. Nothing, just the ticking of an old clock somewhere downstairs. She almost convinced herself she had imagined it. Then Koda stood. His nails clicked softly against the wooden floor. His ears pointed toward the front of the house. He wasn't barking. He wasn't growling. He was listening. Wren sat upright. Koda. The dog remained perfectly still. Then it came again. Knock. 3 slow taps. Measured. Patient. Not loud enough to frighten, just loud enough to be impossible to ignore. She looked at the bedside clock. 11:17 p.m. Her heart began to beat faster. Who would visit an abandoned farmhouse at this hour? There were no neighbors nearby. No lights across the fields. No passing cars. Only darkness. She pulled on her boots, wrapped a sweater around her shoulders, and quietly walked downstairs. Koda stayed 1 step ahead of her the whole way. Every light in the house remained off. The moon gave just enough silver light to outline the front door. She stopped a few feet away. Silence. She reached for the handle. Then she hesitated. Silas had told her something years ago. She could still hear his voice as clearly as if he were standing behind her. Never open a door because you're afraid, sweetheart. Open it because you've decided to know the truth. She took a slow breath. She unlocked the deadbolt. She turned the handle. The door swung open. Cold mountain air drifted inside. The porch was empty. No footsteps, no vehicle. No shadow walking away. Only the endless meadow stretching beneath the moonlight. Wren stepped outside. Hello? Her voice disappeared into the night. Koda walked slowly across the porch, his nose close to the wooden floor. He stopped near the top step. He sniffed once. Then he lifted his head toward the giant cliff behind the house. His tail moved. Not with excitement, with recognition. Wren followed his gaze. The cliff stood silent beneath the stars, and for the briefest moment, she could have sworn she saw a small light near the base. A flicker. There. And then gone. She blinked. The light was gone. The wind stirred through the grass once more. She wrapped her arms around herself and turned back toward the house. That was when she saw it, resting against the front door, exactly where she had just been standing, a single brass key. She stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't rusty. It wasn't covered in dust. If anything, it looked as though someone had polished it only days before. She slowly bent down and picked it up. It was heavier than she expected. A single letter had been engraved into the metal. S. Her breath caught. Silas. Koda stepped closer. He sniffed the key once. Then he looked toward the cliff again. His tail did not wag. He simply waited. Wren slipped the key into her coat pocket. Tomorrow, she whispered. We'll see what you're trying to tell me. The wind answered with a quiet sigh across the meadow. Now, let me pause here for just a moment. Because before Wren opens that mysterious lock in the morning, I want you to think about something. 3 slow knocks. No one there. A polished brass key with her grandfather's initial on it. And a dog who acted like he recognized someone standing near the cliff. Do you think there was really someone out there that night? Comment the letter A if you think someone was watching Wren from the shadows. Comment the letter B if you think it was something her grandfather had planned long ago. Comment the letter C if you think the truth is stranger than either of those, because what she finds tomorrow morning inside that cliff is going to change everything. Stay with me. It only gets more incredible from here. She barely slept the rest of the night. Every creak of the old farmhouse pulled her awake. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps crossing the porch. Yet no more knocking came. When morning finally arrived, soft golden light spilled across the valley. The farmhouse looked completely different in the daylight, less mysterious, almost welcoming. She made coffee in an old enamel pot she had found in the kitchen. Koda ate his breakfast quickly. Then, for the first time since they had arrived, he walked to the front door and sat beside it, waiting. "You really want me to go out there, don't you?" Koda stood immediately. That was answer enough. The barn stood about 60 yards from the house. Its red paint had faded almost to gray. One door leaned crooked on broken hinges. The roof sagged in the middle. Wren understood why anyone would have called this property worthless, but Silas had never been the kind of man who threw broken things away. He fixed them. Maybe that was why he had left this place to her. Koda reached the barn first, but instead of going inside, he circled the building once, nose close to the ground. Then he stopped beside an old rain barrel. Hidden behind it was a narrow wooden door Wren hadn't noticed before. It was built flush against the wall of the barn, almost invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. She tried the handle. Locked. Wren reached into her pocket. She pulled out the brass key. For a moment, she just stared at it. What are the odds? She slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, almost as if it had been waiting. The door swung open, and what she saw inside stopped her breath. It wasn't a room. It was a tunnel, a narrow passage carved directly into the base of the granite cliff. Dark, cool, silent, barely wide enough for one person to walk through. Wren stood at the entrance for a long moment. Koda pushed past her without hesitation. He walked 6 or 7 steps into the tunnel. Then he stopped, and he looked back, waiting for her. She swallowed hard. She grabbed the flashlight she had brought from the truck. She stepped inside. The tunnel smelled of stone and cold earth. Her footsteps echoed softly. She walked slowly, one hand against the wall, the other holding the light. The passage curved once, then again. She could no longer see the entrance behind her. After maybe 200 feet, the tunnel opened up into a cavern, a natural cave hollowed out of the mountain thousands of years ago, large enough to hold a small living room, dramy, silent, and already furnished. Wren stood frozen in the doorway. There was a wooden desk, a folding chair, a cot with a wool blanket, a camping stove, shelves lined with notebooks, maps pinned to the stone walls, a pair of binoculars, a military-grade radio. This wasn't a hiding place. This was a watch post. Her grandfather's watch post. She stepped inside slowly. Her flashlight moved across the walls. Every map showed the same region. Every notebook was labeled by date. Some of them went back more than 15 years. On the desk sat a green metal toolbox. She recognized it instantly. It was her grandfather's, the one she thought she had sold at the pawn shop months ago. She remembered carrying it there herself. She remembered the man behind the counter counting out $40, unless he had owned 2 of them. She lifted the lid. Her hands were shaking now. Inside was a folded envelope. Across the front, written in his familiar careful hand, were 4 simple words. For Wren, when Koda leads you here. Her eyes filled with tears, she sat down slowly on the cot. Koda climbed up beside her, and rested his head on her leg. She unfolded the letter. My dear Wren, if you're reading this, then Koda trusted you enough to bring you here. Trust him. He has better instincts than most people I've ever known. There are things about this land I could not explain to you when you were growing up. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted you to have a normal life for as long as possible. Some people believe evil always arrives looking dangerous. It doesn't. Sometimes it brings homemade pie. Sometimes it smiles at you across the church pew. Sometimes it is the first person to offer help after the storm. Watch their eyes before you listen to their words. That's where the truth always hides. I love you more than you know, and I am so very sorry I could not tell you this in person. Grandpa. Wren read the letter 3 times. She could hear his voice in every line. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Then she looked up at the maps on the walls. She stood. She walked closer. The maps covered every inch of the county, and on each one several locations had been marked in blue ink. The ranch, an old logging road, an abandoned silver mine, and one place circled twice. Ashworth Timber Mill. She frowned. The Ashworth family had lived outside Blackwood Ridge for generations. Cyrus Ashworth ran the mill. He had been her grandfather's closest friend for over 35 years. They had gone fishing together, watched 4th of July fireworks from the same hill, shared Thanksgiving dinners. Silas had trusted Cyrus like a brother. Why would he circle that place twice? Suddenly Koda lifted his head. His ears stood straight. Someone was outside. Wren quickly switched off the flashlight. The cavern fell into complete darkness. She held her breath. She heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, not inside the barn, outside it, crunching on the gravel path near the rain barrel. Koda remained perfectly still. He did not bark. He did not growl. That frightened Wren more than barking would have, because Koda always barked at strangers. He only stayed quiet when he was trying not to be noticed. The footsteps stopped. A man's voice drifted through the thin wooden wall. Looks like somebody's been here. Another voice answered. Deeper. Older. You sure the front gate was open? Wren held her breath. She hadn't closed the gate when she drove in yesterday. At the time, it hadn't seemed important. Now it felt like a mistake she might not be able to take back. The second man laughed softly. Probably just kids. Maybe. A long silence followed. Then came a sentence that made her blood run cold. Still, keep an eye on the house. The footsteps slowly faded. Neither Wren nor Koda moved. 1 minute passed, then another. Finally, Koda relaxed. Wren let out the breath she had been holding. Who were those men? They hadn't knocked. They hadn't called out. They had simply checked, as if visiting the property was part of a routine. She looked down at her grandfather's letter one more time. And for the first time since she had arrived at Hollowstone Ranch, she understood something that changed everything. Silas hadn't left her a post to rebuild her life. He had left her a puzzle. And somewhere inside that puzzle was the reason he never came home. The next morning, Wren woke before sunrise. For the first time in months, she didn't wake with that familiar weight pressing down on her chest. The grief was still there. She knew it always would be, but it no longer felt like an anchor. It felt like a mission. Koda was already waiting by the front door. The moment she picked up her notebook, he stood and wagged his tail once. Not excited, expectant, as if he understood they had work to do. She smiled at him softly. Looks like we're partners now. Over the next several days, life settled into an unusual rhythm. To anyone driving past the farmhouse, Wren looked like nothing more than a young woman trying to restore an old family property. She painted the porch railing. She repaired broken fence posts. She planted vegetables in the neglected garden behind the house. She waved politely whenever a truck slowed near the gate. She never acted suspicious. That was exactly how Silas would have wanted it. But every evening after the last light faded from the valley, her routine quietly changed. She carried her grandfather's notebooks into the cavern. She lit an old kerosene lantern. She sat down at the desk, and she began to read. The notebooks were meticulous. Dates, times, vehicle descriptions, license plate numbers, weather conditions, cargo estimates, everything her grandfather had observed over the past several years. At first, the entries seemed random. Then a pattern began to emerge. Every Tuesday night, every Friday night, between 11:30 and midnight, trucks moved along the same back roads, never using their high beams, never stopping at any farm, always heading in the same direction, toward Ashworth Timber Mill. Wren spread the largest map across the desk. She traced the route with her finger. The mill sat on the edge of federal land, miles of unmonitored forest. A perfect location for something. But for what? She flipped through more pages, and that was when she found a folder tucked inside the back of one of the notebooks. A folder with official markings, United States Marshals Service. Her hands went cold. She opened it slowly. Inside were reports, investigation notes, photographs, and a document with her grandfather's name printed at the top. Senior Deputy Marshal Silas Callahan. Case number 4471. Federal Contract Fraud Investigation. Wren sat down slowly. She had always believed her grandfather was retired. He had left the Marshals Service years ago, or so he had told her. But this folder was dated only 3 years old. Silas hadn't been retired. He had been undercover for 20 years. Suddenly, all the strange gaps in her memory began to make sense. The trips he took every few weeks. The phone calls he took in the barn. The way he always seemed to know things before they were in the news. The way certain people at church seemed nervous around him. He hadn't just been living quietly in the mountains. He had been watching. Wren read for hours. She read until the kerosene lantern burned low. She read until her eyes were tired and her hands were shaking. The case was massive. For over a decade, a network of contractors had been submitting fraudulent bids for federal timber and land management projects. Millions of dollars. Falsified documents. Money laundered through legitimate businesses across 3 states. At the center of it all was a name Silas had circled again and again in red ink. Judge Thaddeus Marsh, the circuit judge for the entire county. The man Wren had once shaken hands with at a church picnic when she was 15. The man who had smiled at her and said her grandfather was one of the finest men he had ever known. The man everyone in Blackwood Ridge trusted. Wren sat back in the chair. Her heart pounded. Silas hadn't just been investigating a crime. He had been building a case against one of the most powerful men in Montana. And he had been doing it alone. Koda pressed his head against her leg. She stroked his ears absently. "He never told me any of this," she whispered. Koda looked up at her with those old, wise amber eyes. She understood now why her grandfather had bought this land 10 years ago, why he had chosen this ranch, why he had carved a hidden watch post into the mountain itself. Because he couldn't trust anyone else with what he knew. Not the local sheriff, not the county attorney, not the state police. In a county where the judge himself was involved, there was no one left to trust. So, he built his own quiet war. And now, his war had become hers. That evening, Koda did something strange. He walked to the corner of the cavern where an old wool coat hung on a wooden peg. He stood in front of it. He sniffed the fabric slowly. Once, twice, 3 times. Then his tail began to wag. Not the wag of a happy dog, the wag of a dog who had just found something he had been looking for a long time. Wren watched him from the desk. "What is it, boy?" Koda pressed his nose deeper into the coat. He inhaled. Then he turned and looked at Wren, his amber eyes bright in the lantern light. She stood. She walked over. She lifted the coat gently from the peg. It was her grandfather's. She had not seen it in years. It still smelled faintly of cedar smoke and coffee. The 2 smells she would always associate with him. But something else, too. Something Koda knew and she did not. She held the coat against her chest. "You still smell him, don't you?" she whispered. Koda thumped his tail once against the stone floor. A dog's nose does not lie. A dog's nose remembers what the heart forgets. She did not understand it then, but somewhere deep in her chest, she felt something small and stubborn begin to grow. Hope. The next afternoon, a familiar sound interrupted Wren's work. A vehicle coming up the driveway. She stepped out onto the porch. An old blue pickup was pulling to a stop. An elderly woman climbed out, tall, silver-haired, moving with the careful confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime carrying responsibility. She wore a simple wool coat and sturdy boots. She carried a small basket covered with a checkered cloth. Koda watched her carefully, but he did not bark. That was the first thing Wren noticed. The woman walked to the bottom of the porch steps and stopped. "You must be Wren," she said. Her voice was calm, warm, but carrying something else beneath it, something measured. "I am. My name is Odette Vance. I live at the end of the Ridge Road. I used to be a friend of your grandfather's." She lifted the basket. "I brought you some bread. And I brought you a warning." Wren felt her stomach tighten. A warning. Odette climbed the porch steps slowly. She sat down on the wooden bench beside the door. She placed the basket on the small table. She looked at Wren with clear, thoughtful gray eyes. "May I speak plainly? Please." Odette folded her hands in her lap. "I served as a federal judge for 23 years, dear. I retired to this valley 11 years ago. Your grandfather and I met at a community meeting my first month here. Within a week, we understood something about each other." She paused. "We had both been sent here for the same reason." Wren stared at her. "You knew him. I knew him better than almost anyone." Wren sat down slowly on the bench beside her. Odette continued, her voice soft. "Silas didn't tell you about me, and I understand why. He wanted you to have a life, a real one. He wanted you to grow up thinking your grandfather was just an ordinary man in an ordinary town." She smiled sadly. "But he was not ordinary. And this is not an ordinary town." Wren swallowed hard. "Do you know what happened to him?" Odette was quiet for a long moment. "I know some of it, not all. What I can tell you is this. Your grandfather was very close to finishing what he started. Someone realized how close he was, and someone decided he could not be allowed to finish." Wren felt tears sting her eyes. "Is he dead?" Odette looked at her carefully. "I do not know, but I have reason to believe he may not be." Wren stopped breathing. "What? There are certain things that would have happened if he were dead. Records, movements, signals. Those things have not happened, not the way they should have." She reached over and gently placed her hand over Wren's. "I am not promising you anything, but I am telling you that hope is not foolish yet." Wren couldn't speak. Her whole body felt frozen. Odette leaned back on the bench. "There is something else you should know. I have been watching this house since you arrived. Not because I doubted you, because I was making sure no one else was watching you first." Wren looked at her sharply. "And someone is. Let me stop the story right here for a moment, because I can already feel this getting big. Silas is not just retired. He has been an undercover United States Marshal for 20 years. He built a case against a corrupt judge, and now a retired federal judge from down the road is telling Wren her grandfather may still be alive, and someone is watching the house. Before we continue, I want to know what you're feeling right now. If you think Odette is telling the whole truth, comment, 'Trust her.' If you think she is hiding something, even something small, comment, 'She knows more.' And please, if you are enjoying this story, take 1 second to like this video. It really does help me keep telling stories like this one, and it lets other grandmothers, mothers, and animal lovers find Wren and Koda too. Now, let's get back to it, because things are about to move very fast." Wren stared at Odette. "Someone is watching the house." "Yes. For how long?" "Since the day you drove in." Wren swallowed hard. "Who?" Odette shook her head slowly. "I do not know his face, only his vehicle. A dark green SUV with no plates. He passes twice a day, once in the morning, once in the late evening. He never stops, but he always slows down at the top of the ridge, just enough to see the whole property." Wren's heart pounded. "What does he want?" "To see if you have found what your grandfather hid, and to see if you understand what it means." Odette leaned forward slightly. "Wren, I need to know something, and I need you to be honest with me. Have you found the cavern?" For a long moment, Wren did not answer. Then quietly, she nodded. Odette closed her eyes with visible relief. "Good. Then he did leave you the trail. I hoped he had." She opened her eyes. "Listen to me carefully now. What you have found is not enough. Your grandfather was building a case that required more than surveillance. He needed a witness. He needed a document that only one person could produce. And that person is very close by. Closer than you may think." Wren frowned. "Who?" Odette hesitated. Then she said the name softly. "Cyrus Ashworth." Wren felt her stomach drop. Cyrus' grandpa's oldest friend, Odette, nodded slowly. "Cyrus was not always part of what is happening at that mill. He was pulled in by Judge Marsh many years ago. Threatened, blackmailed, trapped. Your grandfather always believed that Cyrus, at the very heart of it, was still a good man who had lost his way." She paused. Silas was trying to get Cyrus to testify, in exchange for protection for his family. Wren stared at her. "Cyrus knows everything. Cyrus knows almost everything." "Yes. Then why hasn't he come forward?" Odette's voice grew very quiet. "Because he is afraid. Because his wife is dying of cancer. Because his grandchildren live 2 miles from Judge Marsh's house. Because for years, no one on the right side of the law would even believe him." She looked at Wren carefully. "Until now." Wren sat back against the bench. Her mind was spinning. Odette stood slowly. She adjusted her coat. "I will not stay longer today, dear. It is not safe for either of us if I am seen here too often. But I will come back. Soon. And when I do, we will talk about what must happen next." She looked down at Koda, and she smiled gently. "Hello, old friend. I have missed you." Koda thumped his tail once against the wooden porch. Wren blinked. "He knows you." "Of course he does. I have known him since he was a young dog." Odette walked down the porch steps. She turned back at the bottom. "Wren, Listen to me. Do not go into town alone tomorrow. Do not answer the door after dark. And whatever you do not go near Ashworth Timber Mill until I return." Wren nodded silently. Odette climbed into her old truck. The engine turned over slowly. She lifted one hand in farewell, and then she was gone. Wren stood on the porch, long after the sound of her truck faded into the trees. Koda leaned against her leg. "I don't know what to believe anymore, boy," she whispered. He looked up at her with steady amber eyes. Some part of her did know. She believed Odette. She just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost her to believe. The next 3 days changed everything. Wren stayed close to the ranch. She followed Odette's advice. She did not go into town. She did not answer the door after dark. She spent her afternoons pretending to work in the garden, and her nights inside the cavern, reading, cross-checking, learning her grandfather's system. She began to see the pattern more clearly now. The trucks that moved past Hollowstone Ranch on Tuesday and Friday nights were not just moving cargo. They were moving falsified paperwork, signed contracts, sealed envelopes carried between the mill and a certain judge's ranch house at the far end of the county. Silas had spent years mapping every route, every driver, every drop-off point. He had built a case that could bring down Judge Marsh and 11 other men, but he had never gotten to file it. On the third evening, Wren was standing at the kitchen window when Koda suddenly stood up. His whole body went rigid. He did not bark. He simply stared at the front door. Wren froze. Someone was on the porch. She held her breath. There was no knock, no footstep, only silence. Then, softly from the other side of the door, a man's voice. "Wren, it's Cyrus Ashworth. Please open the door. I don't have much time." Wren stared at the door. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. She looked at Koda. Koda did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. But he did not relax either. He simply watched. Wren slowly walked toward the door. She unlocked it. She opened it just wide enough to see him. Cyrus Ashworth stood on the porch. 66 years old, weathered face, kind eyes, wearing a canvas work coat and a wool cap pulled low. But something was different from the man Wren remembered from childhood picnics and 4th of July parades. This man looked exhausted, hollowed out, like a man who had not slept in years. "I know you weren't expecting me," he said quietly. "I know Odette told you to stay away from me, but she doesn't know what I've been trying to do for the last 6 months. And she doesn't know what happened to your grandfather." Wren's breath caught in her throat. "You know." Cyrus closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "I know, because I was the last person to see him alive." For a long moment, Wren could not speak. Then slowly she opened the door and let him in. Cyrus sat down at the kitchen table. He removed his cap. His hands were trembling. Wren stayed standing. Koda stood beside her. Not aggressive, just watchful. Cyrus looked up at her. "Your grandfather came to me last April. He asked me to testify. He said if I did, he could protect my family. He said he had built a case that would end everything Marsh had done. He said he needed one more piece. He needed me." Cyrus's voice cracked. "I told him no. I was too afraid. I told him I needed time to think." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "He didn't get angry with me. He didn't threaten me. He just looked at me with those calm gray eyes of his. And he said, 'Cyrus, whatever you decide, I want you to know I forgive you already.' Then he left." Cyrus took a deep breath. 3 days later, he disappeared. Wren felt tears on her face. She did not try to stop them. Cyrus continued, I have spent 6 months trying to find him. Not with the sheriff. Not with anyone in this town. I cannot trust them. I have looked in every abandoned property, every old cabin, every place I could think of where a man might be held. He looked up at her. And I found something 2 weeks ago. Wren's chest tightened. What? The old Blackwood silver mine? 15 miles north of here. It has been closed for 40 years. But someone has been going in and out of it recently. Fresh tire tracks. Fresh boot prints. He paused. I couldn't go in alone. I was too afraid. But I stood at the entrance long enough to hear something. Cyrus swallowed. I heard someone coughing. Deep in the mine. Then I heard someone else say, Shut up, old man. Nobody's coming for you. Wren covered her mouth with her hand. Grandpa, she whispered. Cyrus nodded slowly. I believe so. I do not know for certain. But I believe so. Wren felt her knees go weak. She sat down slowly across from him. Why didn't you tell someone? Why didn't you tell Odette? Cyrus looked down at the table. Because if Marsh finds out I have said anything to anyone, my wife and my grandchildren will not survive the week. Marsh has men everywhere. Deputies, contractors, even some folks at church. I have been trying to figure out how to save your grandfather without losing my own family. He looked up at her. And then I heard you had moved into this house, and I knew. I knew Silas had planned for this. I knew he had left you the trail. He leaned forward. I will testify, Wren. I will tell everything I know. I will sign every document. I will stand up in every court. But you have to help me first. You have to help me get your grandfather out of that mine. Because if we go to the authorities first, Marsh will know within 1 hour. And your grandfather will be dead before sundown. Wren stared at him. Her mind was racing. She thought of her grandfather, alive, somewhere in the darkness, coughing, alone. She thought of Odette's warning. She thought of the promise she had signed her name to in her notebook. Protect innocent people. She looked at Cyrus. When tomorrow night? Marsh's men rotate shifts on Wednesday. Between 11 and midnight, only one man is at the mine. If we go, then we can get in. We can get him out. But we need someone we can trust to be waiting with a vehicle at the road. Wren nodded slowly. Odette, yes. And after we get him out, then and only then we go to the federal authorities. Not the local ones. Not the state ones. Federal. That is the only way this ends without more harm. Wren was silent for a long time. Then she stood. I need to call Odette. Cyrus nodded. I know. Tell her everything. And tell her one more thing. Wren looked at him. Tell her that I am not the man I was 6 months ago. Tell her I finally understand what your grandfather was trying to teach me. He stood up slowly. He put his cap back on. He paused at the door. Wren, yes, your grandfather loved you more than anything on this earth. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that. He talked about you every single time I saw him. Every single time. Wren couldn't speak. She just nodded. Cyrus opened the door. He stepped out into the evening, and then he was gone. Wren stood alone in the kitchen, Koda pressed against her leg. She reached down and buried her fingers in his gray fur. Grandpa is alive, boy, she whispered. Koda thumped his tail once. She had never heard a sweeter sound in her entire life. That night, Wren did not sleep. She called Odette from a satellite phone her grandfather had hidden inside the cavern. Odette listened without interrupting. When Wren finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Then Odette said quietly, "I will bring a marshal I trust, a woman I served with in Denver. Her name is Elena Ortiz. She is the only person on this earth I would put your grandfather's life in the hands of. She will be here by tomorrow evening. We will not fail him." Wren closed her eyes. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet, dear. Rest tonight. Tomorrow will be the longest day of your life." Wren hung up the phone. She sat on the front porch until the sun came up. Koda sat beside her the whole time. She watched the light slowly fill the sky over the valley. The pine ridges turned from black to purple to gold. The cliff face behind the ranch caught the first rays of dawn. It glowed like something holy. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about all the mornings he had watched sunrises just like this one. All the coffee cups, all the quiet conversations, all the times he had told her that even the longest night knew how to end. She had never appreciated those words as a teenager. Now she wished she could hear him say them just one more time. Soon, she thought. Please, God. Soon. Wednesday afternoon moved slowly. Odette arrived at 3 o'clock with a woman Wren had never seen before. Elena Ortiz was in her late 40s, compact, alert, wearing plain clothes and a quiet expression that suggested she had spent her whole life being underestimated and using it as an advantage. She shook Wren's hand firmly. "Ma'am, I served with your grandfather for 11 years before I transferred to Denver. He was one of the finest men I have ever known. We are bringing him home tonight." Wren felt tears prick her eyes. She simply nodded. The three women and Cyrus met inside the cavern. Elena studied the maps, studied the notebooks, studied Cyrus for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Your information is solid. Your grandfather's records are outstanding. Cyrus, you understand that from the moment we begin, you are officially in federal witness protection. Do you accept?" That Cyrus took a deep breath. He looked at the photograph of Silas on the desk. "I accept." Elena nodded. "Then here is the plan." The plan was simple. Elena and one other marshal she had brought quietly from Denver would enter the mine at 11:45. Cyrus would guide them to the exact spot where he had heard the coughing. Odette would wait with a vehicle at the road, along with a federal medical team disguised as a maintenance van. Wren would stay at the ranch. She did not want to stay. But Elena looked at her very seriously. "Ma'am, if Marsh finds out this operation is underway and no one is at the ranch, he will send men here first to search for evidence. We need you visible. We need lights on in the house. We need it to look like a normal night. It is the safest thing for your grandfather. And it is the most important job I am giving anyone tonight." Wren swallowed hard. Then she nodded. "Okay." Elena squeezed her shoulder. "You are a Callahan. You are exactly where you need to be." At 11 o'clock that night, Wren sat alone in the kitchen. The lights were on. A pot of stew simmered on the stove. A book lay open on the table in front of her. She was not reading it. Koda sat beside her chair, perfectly still, ears alert. She stared at the clock on the wall. 11:15, 11:25, 11:38, 11:45. She closed her eyes and whispered to no one in particular, "Please." 15 miles north, at the mouth of the Blackwood silver mine, Elena Ortiz moved through the darkness like water. Her partner followed 3 steps behind. Cyrus Ashworth walked between them. His hands trembled, but his voice did not. 3rd tunnel on the left, Cyrus whispered. 200 feet in. There is a maintenance room. That is where they keep him. Elena nodded once. They moved deeper into the mine. The air grew colder. The smell of old iron and damp stone pressed in around them. A single lantern burned somewhere ahead, casting long shadows across the rock walls. One guard, Cyrus, mouthed silently. Elena raised 2 fingers. Her partner nodded. They rounded the corner. The guard never even saw them. He was sitting on an overturned crate, reading a paperback novel by lantern light. Elena's partner moved fast, quiet. In under 3 seconds, the man was on the ground, zip-tied, gagged. They moved to the metal door behind him. Elena knocked once, softly. "Sir, it is Elena Ortiz. We are here to bring you home." Silence, then a weak voice from inside. "Elena." "Is that really you?" Elena closed her eyes for 1 second, just one. Then she opened them and picked the lock. The door swung open. Silas Callahan sat on a thin mattress in the corner of the tiny room, wrapped in a blanket he had made from an old feed sack. His beard had grown long. His hair had gone completely white. He was thinner than he should have been, but his gray eyes were the same gray eyes his granddaughter had inherited, steady, kind, unbroken. He looked up at Elena. "Took you long enough?" he said softly. She laughed, a quick, sharp laugh that was half a sob. Then she crossed the room. She knelt down beside him. She wrapped her arms around him. "Welcome back, sir." Behind her, Cyrus Ashworth stepped into the doorway. He froze when Silas looked up and saw him. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Silas smiled. That old, quiet smile Wren would have recognized anywhere. "Cyrus, you came." Cyrus's face crumpled. He walked slowly across the room. He knelt down beside his oldest friend. "I am so sorry, Silas. I am so sorry it took me this long." Silas reached up with a shaking hand and placed it on Cyrus's shoulder. "You came," he said again. "That is all that matters." Elena helped Silas to his feet slowly. He could barely stand, but he refused the stretcher until they were outside the mine. "I want to walk out on my own 2 feet," he whispered, "even if it is only the last 20 steps. So they walked, Elena on one side, Cyrus on the other. And Silas Callahan walked out of the darkness for the first time in 6 months. When they reached the mouth of the mine, the medical team was already waiting. They lifted him carefully onto the stretcher. They wrapped him in warm blankets. They checked his pulse, his pupils, his temperature. He was alive, weak, dehydrated, half-starved, but alive. Elena climbed into the medical van with him. She sat beside the stretcher. She held his hand. "Your granddaughter is waiting for you," she said quietly. "She is at the ranch. She has been fighting for you every single day." Silas closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his weathered cheek. "That is my girl," he whispered. Back at Hollowstone Ranch at exactly 11:52, headlights appeared in the driveway. Koda stood. Wren's heart hammered against her ribs. The vehicle was not Odette's truck. It was not Elena's Marshall van. It was a dark green SUV, with no plates. Wren stopped breathing. The SUV rolled to a stop in front of the porch. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out. He wore a dark coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. She could not see his features clearly, but she did not need to. The way he moved, the way he walked, the quiet confidence. She knew who it was. Judge Thaddeus Marsh. He walked up the porch steps slowly. He stopped at the front door. He knocked 3 times. Not the way Odette had knocked that first night. These knocks were harder, louder. Impatient. Wren stood. Her whole body was shaking, but she was not going to hide. She walked to the door. She took a deep breath. She opened it. Judge Marsh stood on the porch, his face lit only by the pale porch light. He smiled at her, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Miss Callahan, I hope I am not disturbing you at this hour. I was in the area, and I noticed your lights were still on." Wren gripped the door frame. "Your Honor, this is very late for a visit." He tilted his head slightly. "Yes, I know. But something has come to my attention that I felt could not wait until morning." He stepped forward, not aggressively, but without permission. He was now inside the doorway. "There is a rumor that certain federal officers are conducting an operation in this area tonight. I thought it would be neighborly to make sure you were safe." Wren's mouth went dry. He knew. Somehow, he knew. Behind her, Koda began to growl, low, steady, a sound she had never heard him make before. Judge Marsh looked down at the dog. His smile did not change. But something in his eyes did. "I have always been afraid of dogs, Miss Callahan. Would you mind putting him in another room?" Wren did not move. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I don't think I will be doing that." For the first time, his smile faded. He looked at her carefully. "Miss Callahan, you have no idea what you are involved in." Wren stood a little taller. "I have every idea what I am involved in." He took another step forward. That was when she reached behind the door. She pulled out the flashlight she had placed there hours earlier, the largest one from her grandfather's toolbox, heavy, solid. She turned it on directly into his eyes. The beam was so bright it made him flinch and stumble backward. At the same moment, Koda launched himself forward. Not to bite, to block. He planted himself between Wren and the judge. Barking with a fury, Wren had never heard from him. Deep. Warning. Absolutely unshakable. Judge Marsh raised one hand to shield his eyes. His other hand froze halfway toward his coat. Wren pointed the flashlight beam right at his chest. "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't move." He hesitated for 1/2 second. That was all the time it took. The porch flooded with headlights. 3 vehicles, coming up the driveway at high speed. Sirens off. Silent. Deadly serious. Federal marshals. The lead marshal stepped out of the first vehicle. Voice like ice. "Judge Marsh. Federal marshals. On the ground. Now." He froze. For a long moment, he did not move. He simply stared past Wren. Into the house, as if calculating whether he could still turn this in his favor. Then slowly, he lowered himself to his knees. Then to his stomach. The marshal walked up the porch steps with her partner right behind her. She cuffed him herself. She looked at Wren. "Your grandfather is alive. He is in the medical van behind me. He has been asking for you the whole way here." Wren's knees gave out. She sank to the porch floor. Koda pressed against her chest. She wrapped her arms around him and sobbed, not from sadness, from something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Relief. The medical van waited at the bottom of the driveway. Wren walked toward it slowly. Her legs would not stop trembling. Koda walked beside her the whole way, pressed against her leg, refusing to be even one step behind. The back doors of the van were open. Warm yellow light spilled out into the cold night. And there, sitting on the edge of the stretcher, wrapped in a heavy blanket, was her grandfather, Silas Callahan, thinner than she remembered, grayer, his face gaunt from 6 months in the dark. But his gray eyes were the same, steady, kind. Home. He looked up. He saw her. He tried to stand. A paramedic gently held him back, so he simply held out his arms. Wren ran the last few steps. She fell into him. She did not speak. She could not. He held her against his chest. He pressed his cheek against the top of her head. She could feel him shaking. She could feel his tears soaking into her hair. He whispered her name, just her name, over and over. Wren. Wren, Wren. Koda climbed into the van. He was not supposed to. Nobody stopped him. He pressed his big, graying head against Silas's leg. His tail thumped against the stretcher. Silas reached down. He buried his fingers in Koda's fur. For a long moment, none of the three of them moved. Some homecomings do not need words. Some homecomings are just 3 heartbeats. Finally, beating together again, Silas pulled back and looked at Wren. "You found the trail." She smiled through her tears. "You left me a good one." He touched her cheek gently. "I am so sorry, sweetheart. I am so sorry for every day you had to wonder." She shook her head. "You don't need to apologize. Not for one single day. I understand everything now." He closed his eyes. "You are so much like your grandmother." "Do you know that?" She smiled softly. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at her carefully. "Sweetheart, there is something else, something I need you to know." She waited. "The first night you were at the ranch, the knocks on the door." Wren's breath caught. That was Odette. "She has been watching the property since the day the deed was recorded in your name. When she saw your headlights that first evening, she waited until midnight. Then she left the key on the porch. 3 knocks. That was our signal. Always was. It meant I am here. You are safe. Do not be afraid." Wren looked toward Odette, who had just climbed into the van behind them. The older woman was smiling gently through her own tears. "I did not want to frighten you, dear," Odette said quietly, "but I needed you to find the key. I needed the trail to begin. I could not risk being seen at your door in the daylight. Not until I knew who else was watching." Wren shook her head slowly, tears running freely now. "Koda knew it was you. That was why he was not afraid." Odette nodded. "He always knew, dear. Dogs remember the people who love the people they love." Silas smiled at his old friend. "Odette, I knew you would take care of her." "She took care of herself," Odette said gently. "All I did was leave a key and get out of her way." Silas laughed. It turned into a cough, but it was a laugh. That is exactly what she would have done. The lead marshal appeared at the back of the van. "Sir, we are ready to move. The judge is in custody. Cyrus Ashworth is with our second team. He is safe. His family has been picked up. The federal courthouse in Helena is waiting for our arrival." Silas looked at her. "Elena, thank you." She snapped a quiet salute. "It has been the honor of my career, sir." Wren rode with her grandfather to the hospital in Helena. She held his hand the entire way. She refused to let go. Not even when the paramedics needed to check his vitals. She simply moved her hand to his forearm, and she did not stop touching him. She had waited 6 months. She was not letting go for anything less than the end of the world. He fell asleep somewhere on the interstate. His face relaxed for the first time in half a year. Koda lay across his legs like a warm gray blanket. Wren watched them both, and she cried quietly the whole rest of the drive. Not because she was sad, because for the first time in half a year she was not. Now let me pause here just once more. because I want you to feel this moment fully. For 6 months, Wren believed her grandfather was gone forever. She lived out of a truck. She lost almost everything she owned. She grieved a man she thought would never come home. And now she is holding his hand in the back of a federal medical van because she chose to follow his trail, because she chose to trust an old dog, because she chose to open a door in the middle of the night instead of hiding from it. If this story has moved you, please share it with one person tonight. Just one. A daughter, a friend, a neighbor, somebody who needs to remember that hope is not foolish. Not yet. Not ever. And now, let me tell you how it ended. The trial took 8 months. Wren attended every single day. She sat in the front row of the federal courthouse in Helena. She listened as Cyrus Ashworth testified for 11 hours across 3 days. She listened as Odette Vance produced documents no one else had ever seen. She listened as Elena Ortiz laid out a case so complete and so airtight that Judge Marsh's own attorneys stopped filing motions in the 2nd month. 12 men were indicted. All 12 were convicted. Judge Thaddeus Marsh received 42 years in federal prison. He would not live to see the outside of a cell again. Cyrus Ashworth was placed into witness protection with his wife and his grandchildren. He was allowed to write Wren one letter after the trial. In it, he thanked her for the second chance he did not think he deserved. And he told her that her grandfather had been right about him all along. She read that letter 3 times. Then she pressed it inside her grandfather's old Bible, where it still sits today. Silas took 6 months to recover fully. He was 69 years old now. His hands shook more than they used to. He walked a little slower, but his mind was as clear as it had ever been. He came home to Hollowstone Ranch in the spring. Wren was waiting on the front porch. He walked up the steps. He looked at the fresh coat of white paint, the new flowers in the garden beds, the repaired railing, the polished mailbox. He looked at the little wooden sign Wren had hung beside the driveway. Hollowstone Ranch. Everyone welcome. He looked at her. He could not speak for a long moment. Finally, he said softly, "You have made this place a home." She smiled at him. "I had a good teacher. That summer they built something new together. They turned the old barn into a training facility, a place where retired police dogs, working dogs, and rescue dogs could live out their days in peace, or find new homes with families who understood them. They called it Koda's Second Chance. Koda himself, now 11 years old, and moving slower every month, served as the official welcoming committee. He greeted every new dog with the same calm dignity he had shown Wren the day she arrived. He never barked at new arrivals. He simply sat at the bottom of the porch steps and waited for them to come to him. Every one of them did. Eventually, Odette Vance came for dinner every Sunday. She and Silas would sit on the porch after the meal and talk quietly about old cases, old friends, old regrets, and new hopes. Wren would listen from the kitchen while she washed dishes. She could not hear all the words. She did not need to. Some conversations just belonged to the people having them. Cyrus Ashworth wrote once a year, always at Christmas, always without a return address. Silas would read the letter aloud on Christmas Eve. Then he would fold it carefully and add it to a small wooden box he kept on the mantel. Someday, he would say, "When this is all far enough behind us, we will see him again." Wren believed him. Every morning that summer, Wren still placed 2 bowls on the kitchen table. One for herself, one for her grandfather. This time both were full. Both were eaten. Koda, now sleeping most of the day in a patch of warm sunlight by the fireplace, no longer needed to walk to the second bowl and stare out the window. He knew his family was home. He simply raised his gray head. He watched them eat. And then he closed his eyes and slept. One evening in late autumn, almost exactly 1 year after Wren had first driven up the road to Hollowstone Ranch, she and Silas sat on the front porch together. A quilt was spread across their laps. The sun was sinking behind the granite cliff. The whole sky was gold. Silas turned to her. "Sweetheart, I have wanted to ask you something for a long time, and I could never quite find the right moment." She looked at him. "What is it, Grandpa?" He was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it? Any of it, following the trail, getting involved, everything you gave up?" She thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about the months in the truck, the cold nights, the empty bowls, the fear, the tears, the moments she had been so afraid she couldn't breathe. Then she thought about right now, his hand in hers, the mountain glowing gold, the soft snoring of an old dog by the fireplace behind them. She smiled. "No, Grandpa, not one moment." He squeezed her hand. "You are the finest thing I have ever done with my life, Wren Callahan." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the last of the light. "Grandpa, do you remember what you used to tell me when I was little?" He smiled softly. "I told you a lot of things, sweetheart. You told me that life doesn't decide who we become. We do." His eyes filled with tears. "I remember." She squeezed his hand. "I did not understand it then. I do now. Every choice I made this year, every door I opened, every trail I followed, that was me deciding." She rested her head on his shoulder. "And I decided to become someone worthy of being your granddaughter." He could not speak for a long moment. Then he simply kissed the top of her head. "You always were, sweetheart. You always were." The sun disappeared behind the cliff. The stars came out slowly, one by one. Koda padded out onto the porch. He curled up at their feet. The three of them stayed like that for a long time. Some stories don't end when someone disappears. Sometimes that is exactly where they truly begin. Some people spend a lifetime wondering why someone they love never came home. Wren Callahan spent 6 months wondering, and then she brought him home herself. Because love does not always look like grand rescues and loud victories. Sometimes love looks like a young woman driving toward a farmhouse she has never seen, trusting a dog older than her memories, opening a door in the middle of the night because someone once told her that fear was not a reason to stay hidden. Sometimes love looks like an old man refusing to give up, even in the dark, even alone, even for 6 long months, because he knew somewhere out there was a granddaughter following the trail he had left. And sometimes love looks like a dog, a tired, gray, old dog, who stayed, who waited, who never stopped believing. Maybe that is the greatest inheritance anyone can leave behind. Not land, not money, not even secrets, but a heart brave enough to keep the light burning after we are gone, and someone we have loved enough to carry it forward. If this story touched your heart, please tell me one thing in the comments before you go. Who is the person who taught you what love really means? A parent, a grandparent, a friend, a dog who never left your side. Say their name in the comments. Just their first name, because some names deserve to be remembered. And because tonight, somewhere out there, Wren Callahan is standing on a porch in Montana, watching the stars, holding an old man's hand, listening to a dog snore softly at her feet. And she is thinking about all of you, too. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Good night, and God bless.